Namaste and good evening, everyone. Namaste, Narad.
Your audio is on
Maybe
silent.
it's muted. Namaste, Sraddhalu.
Namaste and welcome to everybody.
We are happy today to continue with a very special theme on the Golden Day, which is in preparation for the 29th February. And we are having the anniversary, I don't know how many years, but there's an anniversary of the supramental manifestation. Maybe Sraddhalu will have a clear picture. And we are very much looking forward to hear your talk for tonight.
Yes. It's a very special occasion in a few days, the 29th of February, and all the more so because it happens once in 4 years. It is something quite unusual, one might say a divine humor, that the day of the supramental manifestation was selected as if to be a day which in the human calendar occurs only once in 4 years. Perhaps one may find in it a deeper symbolism also, as we shall see. But had it just been one day before or one day after, we would have been observing this every year. But because of this choice, it's an anniversary that comes once in 4 years. So, although the supramental manifestation itself took place about 68 years ago, the anniversary is the 17th. It's not the 68th anniversary, it's the 17th anniversary of the Golden Day. On each of those occasions, every 4 years, the mother gave a message, and in the first anniversary, which was in 1960, the card was titled The Golden Day, and the message the mother wrote was, "Henceforth, the 29th February will be the day of the Lord." She has named it. Obviously, it is a very important occasion, and I propose to dwell on the meaning of this with 3 questions which would complete our understanding or give us a more complete understanding. The first question is, what is the supermind? The second question is, what happened on the 29th of February 1956? And the third question would be then, what is the relevance of an anniversary of such an event? In this case, the 17th anniversary. So the first question, what is the supermind, can be approached in many ways. Sri Aurobindo himself describes or defines the supermind using many different, let's say, ways of looking at it. Necessarily, reality being multifaceted, multidimensional, and especially as one approaches the oneness of the divine, you can approach it through an infinity of paths. And especially when we deal with certain profound, essential concepts, they are deeply interconnected with everything else. So one can approach those concepts from many different directions. The first, perhaps most important way of looking at this would be in a vocabulary which is an image that is more easy to recognize. Sri Aurobindo describes the world, the structure of the cosmos, in 7 planes. It is the Vedic symbolism or the Vedic image which he uses. He gives a reason why he prefers to use this. He says it is one of the most applicable for or useful for entering a practice, putting into practice. There are various approaches in which one can describe reality, but this would be the most obvious for its practical implications. 7 planes representing 7 principles which are required for a cosmos to be cosmos and not chaos. The full discussion is somewhere in the Life Divine. But once we recognize the need for these 7, each principle, of course, is interwoven with all others. So as if there are 7 planes within each of the 7 planes, making for 49. And then because there is an involution and an evolution, there is a 49 descending stair and a 49 steps of an ascending stair. And then the origin and the immersion in the inconscient matter add 2 more points, which make for a total of 100. And this, he says, is the deeper sense of the Vedic symbolism or the meaning of the number 100. It means the totality of all the planes, of all the finer gradations of consciousness, etc. But all this is to first bring us back to the idea of the 7 planes. The upper 3 planes, which are referred to as the upper hemisphere, are worlds of oneness. The Sat, Chit and Ananda are worlds in themselves. And the totality as a whole, indivisibly, because they are all worlds of oneness, there is the Satchidananda, which is the totality of it all. It's the way the divine knows itself in its revealed divinity. The divine is beyond all knowing, beyond all manifestation, and yet the divine can know itself. And when it chooses to know itself, it is as Satchidananda. And so it's the divine manifested in full divinity, in its plenitude. You will find a description of these worlds, or a glimpse of these worlds, in Sri Aurobindo's poem Savitri, in the last few cantos, when there is the book of, the book of everlasting day, in the cantos where he describes those domains, where all is oneness, and yet expressed in form, in multiplicity, but the oneness overrides, oneness dominates. The lower 3 worlds of mind, life and matter are as if a reflection of those upper 3. Matter, as an inversion of the reflection, becomes the reflection of Sat. Life, Prana, becomes a reflection of the Chit and the power of Chit, Chit Shakti. And mind becomes as if a reflection of the principle of the supermind, which is actually the force by which these 3 worlds, the Satchidananda manifests. But the lower 3 are inherently divided in consciousness. The oneness is always there because it is the underlying truth of things, but it is invisible, it is lost by the appearance of division, which is so overwhelming that even it seems as if there is no such thing as a oneness in this world. And only a deeper pursuit, analysis, makes us realize that everything is somehow interdependent. You cannot isolate a piece from another truly. Of course, on a practical level with our senses, we say this is this, that is that, and the two can never meet. But in reality, we find there is an underlying unity. So the oneness is completely hidden. To an intellectual quest, it is perceived. Science itself, when it digs deep enough, finds an underlying oneness, but it is elusive, not seen in form. An inversion of the upper 3 worlds, where oneness dominates and multiplicity is as if subdued in relation to the oneness. Of course, you have rich diversity, but the oneness is so overwhelming you can never forget it. All is seen as and experienced as expression of oneness. One existence, one consciousness, one power, one bliss in everything. All is literally substance of that bliss. In the lower, it is the opposite. You do not see the bliss, you do not see the consciousness, you do not know its power, you do not even have a true sense of existence other than a very superficial, fragmented sense of matter, and you identified with the body saying, oh, I exist because I'm born, and if somehow this body vanished, I wouldn't exist. And if anything, you will find existence here to be an existence of an emptiness of space in which matter seems to appear and disappear. An emptiness which is a gigantic, hollow darkness in conscience, or so it seems. But this is the reflection of the upper hemisphere and the lower hemisphere. But the linking principle which joins these two hemispheres is the supermind. So this is the first way in which we approach the supramental consciousness, because it is the power by which the Satchidananda multiplies itself into this manifestation, creation. So it is a power of the Satchidananda. It is the Satchidananda as power of expression. At the same time, it is also the origin of this multiplicity of the extreme fragmentation of the lower hemisphere. So it is the only consciousness in the whole seven planes, let's say, or seven principles, which knows oneness and knows multiplicity. And because it is the origin of the multiplicity, everything, including the most contradictory, finds itself originating in the same oneness. And so two very contradictory things find their origins in this oneness, or otherwise stated, in this supramental consciousness you find the harmonization of all things. All powers, all impulses, or ideas, or principles, all actions, even the most extremely contradictory. Since it originates in that consciousness knows its right place in relation to all, including in what might be, to us, apparent contradiction. As an analogy, I have used this image before, and I happen to have this next to me, so I will use this object also as a reference. If you were to conceive of a mountain, let's say this is our mountain, and all points to the peak. From this oneness, everything flows out in every direction. And so, a flow in this direction and a flow in that direction all have their origin in the same oneness. But the flow in this direction points one way, a flow in that direction points another way. If you remove the unifying principle in between, you have two flows in completely opposite directions, contradicting themselves. Or place them opposing each other and you have a massive collision of two things which come from the same divine. And especially when you go into higher planes, they could be extraordinary powers of action, even what we may call divine principles. But as principles in separate action, you might find them contradicting each other or colliding with each other in their action, and causing therefore a far greater dramatic collision, conflict, chaos. See, our understanding of the supramental working in the world is not very good. We just have this vague idea, supermind, oh, it is power of unity and harmony, creative, and therefore whenever it comes, everything would become perfectly harmonized. Not quite. You have to understand this. All coming from the supermind, if here their action does not recognize the underlying unity of supermind, the same powers could end up creating a massive collision, a massive chaos even, from the contradictory nature of their working here. But each would draw power from the same one, and the closer it is to the supermind, the more intense and extreme might be its power here. So it's not about how powerful something is, it's rather about how much it recovers or knows its underlying oneness in supermind. And to the extent that it reunites in its oneness in supermind, each of these contradictory powers also becomes complementing actions. So the real question is not what action supermind would be able to do in our world. The real question is, can those things which receive the supermind or its action really become conscious of the originating unifying principle that is the supermind? Or will they simply receive its power and action and work perhaps in fragmented ways, as we do see in so many, in the workings of the gods? In the Greek tradition, although the gods have been reduced somewhat human-like, you find how often they quarrel, how often they misunderstand each other. In the Vedic tradition, the gods are still conscious of their underlying oneness. So although their operations are distinct, there is also the power of harmonization which can unify, which is a power of the divine, which must be activated in the Vedic yoga in order to unify the working of the gods. And this is part of the Vedic form of practice. But you come down a little further into the Puranic tradition, the gods are very similar to what you find in the Greek tradition. They are quite fragmented, they've forgotten their oneness, each is too busy doing its own thing, they have misunderstandings and so on. I want to read from a passage of the Mother where she describes what would happen if the supramental consciousness were to appear too suddenly. First, I will read from something which she gave, which she describes in a meeting with school teachers. This is dated March 14th, 1973. There's a whole lot of discussion about conflicts. And then she says, I can't make head or tail of these things. I can no longer be of any help, you see, because all these mental combinations don't make any sense to me anymore. A spirit of confusion has entered the school, I find. They all mean the same thing, but they use different words, and the words clash. Personally, I know they have very similar aspirations, but each one speaks in his own language, and the languages are at cross purposes. So they quarrel over nothing. That's the situation. I think the best would be for everybody to keep quiet for a while. And then she says, I too never had any problems with the people around me, but now we seem to speak different languages. And then she continues, this is the part which is very important. But the effect on me is odd. Remember, she is working to supramentalize her physical consciousness. She has done that in the mind, vital, subtle physical. It's in the body, physical consciousness, that this work is now reached at a very high grade of achievement, realization. She says, but the effect on me is odd. I have the impression that I am ill. There's nothing wrong with me. I am in good health. Yet I have a constant impression of being ill. So a lot of it is because of what she is taking upon herself from the mass of us, the very divided and petty humanity. Then she says, the truth is, it's the transition from the ordinary mental consciousness to the supramental consciousness. The mental consciousness panics in the presence of the supramental consciousness. The vibration is so different, I feel one could die every minute. Only when I am very tranquil. She stays quiet. The old consciousness, which isn't at all a mental consciousness, but anyway, the old consciousness keeps repeating its mantra. There is a mantra, it keeps repeating its mantra, which makes a sort of a backdrop, a contact point. It's very peculiar. But beyond that, there's something full of light and force, but it's so new that it causes almost a panic. And if it does that to me with the long experience I have, if it has the same effect on others, I think we'll all end up lunatics. Well, I think we have to remain very tranquil if we don't want to lose the thread. And there's a whole discussion which follows with the teachers. But she's of course speaking on the action in the physical consciousness. So, I come back to another passage where in 1970, 1st of March, someone asks, since the supramental consciousness is at work on earth, won't these miserable conditions change in spite of everything? Naturally, mother's reply, naturally, the first effect will be a change of consciousness, first among the most receptive, and then in a greater number of people. A change in the general condition of collective life can only come later, perhaps long after individual reactions have been transformed. The first noticeable result is a heightening of the general confusion. So this is the part which for us is a bit difficult to understand. The first noticeable result is a heightening of the general confusion because the old principles have lost their authority, and men, except for a very few, are not ready to obey the divine command because they are incapable of perceiving it. So heightening of general confusion, and of course we see that. This was in fact one of the questions I had comments when I'd heard from somebody who told me this. I think she was a teacher in a different tradition in Kashmir Shaivism, and she said, I was very much drawn to Sri Aurobindo's teaching, but then I found that the mother says supramental consciousness has come down, but I see only increasing chaos. And so that was for her the point of, let's say, failure or loss of interest, but I think there was something else behind. She went into the Kashmir Shaivism tradition and became a teacher in that. But this is one aspect of the explanation. But there's another very interesting comment that she makes. This is on 15th February 1958, just about 2 years after the supramental manifestation. She writes, or she says, I don't know. Last night, I had a vision of what the supramental world would be like if people were not sufficiently prepared. The confusion that now exists on earth is nothing in comparison with what might happen. So what does it mean? Suddenly if the supramental consciousness, power, force would be manifest in everyone, then what would happen is this confusion. Just imagine an extremely powerful will with the capacity to transform matter according to its liking. If the sense of collective unity did not grow in proportion to the growth of power, the resulting conflict would be even more acute and chaotic than all our material conflicts. So it is perhaps by some higher diviner wisdom that the mother described this appearance or the manifestation of the supramental consciousness as being the supramental consciousness and light and force, but not its power. So we will read shortly what that description is like. But first, to complete this part of our discussion, what is the supramental consciousness? We have seen it as the linking principle between the oneness and the multiplicity. Therefore also the unifying principle which brings harmony in all things. One implication of this is that under its influence, anything that comes to oppose it would be automatically subsumed because any opposing force is already a part of the supramental working, because that force also has its origin in the supermind. All it would do is it would realign the nature of the action of that force to its purpose, and the same force would then be used to amplify or accelerate the intention of the supermind. So this is the amazing thing, even what comes to oppose it is turned and used for the hastening of the supramental evolution. So this is something extraordinary. You have to really understand how this works once you understand the working of this principle that unifies, harmonizes everything. There's another way of knowing the supermind. Since it is the power by which the divine manifests, it is also the consciousness in which the divine knows itself and expresses itself. So this is the other way of looking at it. The supramental consciousness is the cognitive power of the divine. The power of perception, the power of knowing itself is the supermind. So when a human being tries to know the divine, necessarily we reduce our knowing to that which we are familiar with. We reduce the knowing to that which we can contain within our little box of conceptual power. Or we reduce it to the level of experience of our embodied consciousness, meaning reduce it to the narrowness, dullness and rigidity of the physical form. When in fact that consciousness is the very opposite. It is one of infinite light, infinite plasticity, infinite power, oneness with infinite multiplicity, all of which is contrary to our physical mind and physical sensory capacity to know. So you will never be able to know the supermind, because whatever you do, you will end up reducing it. Two people attempting to know will reduce in completely different terms and end up with a contradiction and collision, although they may be partially right in themselves. The only way to know the supermind would then be to shift into the quality of consciousness in which and by which this divine knows itself. Or the only way to know the divine would be to enter into the consciousness by which the divine knows itself. And that consciousness is infinite to begin with. It is infinitely diverse. It is also a consciousness of eternity that sees and knows all of time, all of space, and all possibilities as one whole of a totality. It is not a consciousness of division or separation. It is a continuum of a oneness indivisible. So you want to know the divine truly the way the divine knows itself, you have to literally rise into this kind of a consciousness. Or you grow into the consciousness of its power of cognition, which is then the supermind. So another way to know the supermind is to know it as the power by which the divine knows itself, which should become eventually our means of knowing not just the divine in its totality, but all the divine working in its multiplicity. And therefore it is only in a supramental consciousness, in a supramental knowing, that you can truly know the world the way it actually is. Knowing the world from any inferior grade, however wonderful or high it may be, you will always have a partial grasp of the true nature of the world. Interesting. I am reminded of the example Sri Aurobindo gives when the Buddha approached the Absolute or the Divine, because it was through a working of the mind's operation. And you will see the bulk of the practices of Buddhism are focused on mind mastery, because it is through mind that the entry takes place. And mind approaching the Absolute has to use its familiar terms, which are what? Analysis, synthesis. Cut up into pieces, rejoin. Cut up into pieces to compare. But approaching the Absolute, there is nothing to compare. There is no capacity to cut. And there is no synthesis therefore possible. What does the mind perceive? Something which cannot be cut, something which has no other. Well, it does not exist to the mind's power of cognition. And so it experiences as a blank, as an emptiness. And yet the emptiness is a fullness that manifests. And so even the word emptiness fails. And you have the conclusions of the highest realizations of the Buddhist approach, because the entry was through the mind. Sri Aurobindo explains how Shankaracharya approached the same thing from an intuitive consciousness. And how does the intuitive know? It does not follow the mind's operation of comparing, analysis and synthesis. It knows by a touch of the thing to be known, but a point of consciousness touching it. Therefore necessarily reducing the thing to be known to what the point is able to touch. And the rest which it is not touching is therefore not known, or becomes in relation to what is known secondary or unreal or even contradictory. But what is known is truly known, but in its limitation. So because Shankaracharya approaches the divine, the absolute, through the intuitive consciousness, he experiences that as Satchidananda. But what happens to all the rest which it has not touched? The world in particular now becomes contradictory, opposite, or unreal, illusory. So Brahman is the truth and the world is a relativity, appearance, illusion. Brahma Satyam Jagad Mithya is the famous statement. Of course, one can dwell on the etymology. Mithya, myth itself represents the play of relativity and so on. So here's an absolute against which the relativity, but still the relativity is inferior, trivial, illusory, irrelevant, not part of the absolute, because it's the intuitive consciousness which only caught one. The rest then is not seen or known directly and becomes therefore secondary or even contrary. You need to go one more step above. Overmental is not enough. Into the supermind. In the supramental consciousness, you will meet the divine as the divine knows itself in its totality. And then you will know everything, including the oneness, including the multiplicity, the absolute and the relativities as one whole. In the way the divine is equally present, powerfully present, entirely present in each of these, both in its extreme of the absolute, in its extreme of the multiplicity, in its extreme of oneness, in its extreme of division, and so on, but equally, entirely present everywhere. To the mind, this seems contradictory, but in the supramental consciousness, even in the intuitive one can have a sense of the truth of this, but in the supramental consciousness, it is overwhelming oneness, no contradiction, only completion in oneness. So, supermind can be known also as the cognitive power of the divine by which the divine knows itself. It is not only a power of knowing, it is also a power of forming, of becoming, of expressing, of manifesting, of becoming many. From that oneness, from that cognition of the divine, you flow into this to become the universe. All is created by the direct working of the supermind. Always in its origin it is the supermind, and then it may go through multiple degrees of reduction or specialization. So the supermind is also the creative power which forms the universe. It is the, so to say, origin of the Big Bang, if that is how we want to see the world's appearance. So now we understand why the supermind is the bridge between the upper hemisphere, lower hemisphere. It's the link between the oneness and the multiplicity. It is the harmonizer and unifier of all contraries. It is the one thing to which nothing can oppose inherently because all is included. But it is also power by which it can overwhelm, possess, create, manifest all with zero opposition. As a power, it is therefore the most stupendous power because all other powers are itself in some specialization. So nothing exists that can oppose as a power. All is there to somehow align and fulfill the supermind when it acts directly. Of course, it does not. In this text which I just read is what you see this aspect of the power which the mother refers to. Suddenly, if everybody had this tremendous will and tremendous power to shape and form matter, what would we do if we have not grown into the consciousness of the supramental, just having its power? Well, you can see the chaos would be that much more amplified. But this is the power aspect which we also understand. And then there is the ananda, the bliss aspect of the supermind, which is also infinite, unendingly rich and diverse. This supramental consciousness, it was Sri Aurobindo's and the mother's mission to embody that, first to realize that consciousness and then to embody it and then to fix it into humanity. Each step of their own sadhana was done in constant connection with the collective consciousness of humanity, infusing, lifting from humanity as well as infusing what they had realized. Necessarily, the first round of support was those who were the most ready, the most open, the most receptive, the most prepared. Many of them would have been here in the ashram, some would have been elsewhere, but still in the overall same influence or alignment of purpose. And these became, so to say, the link points through which whatever was realized, whatever was achieved and done, was also infused into humanity. The principal link being the mother herself as the Shakti of Sri Aurobindo. And all this was to bring that consciousness down into humanity while lifting humanity into its light, consciousness and force and power. The net result of it would have been that this consciousness would become an active force working in humanity. In the same way as there was a time when in the animal consciousness, although intelligence is inherent everywhere, even in the worm, even in subconscious processes, in the ape which was most ready, some direct light of intellect would be occasionally glimmering as an exception. But there would be a time where even that was not so, and the possibility of such a consciousness would not have been realized. And when that consciousness came, it would act to as if lift the working of the ape or whoever was most ready to itself, infusing itself into their brains, into their mind, into their consciousness, forming, shaping, preparing for this intelligent human, Homo sapiens, to emerge. Something similar was being done here for humanity. And so this was the work that Sri Aurobindo and the mother came for, of which the most significant part would have been to bring that as an active force in human evolution. Which brings us now to the second question we asked: what happened on 29th February 1956? Well, this work could have been done, Sri Aurobindo said, very early on, if it had been just for themselves. As we do see, and he suggests this, that among the Vedic rishis, many had reached the supramental consciousness as an individual realization. It left an imprint necessarily, but not as an active force in human evolution of the supermind. So it was with them. They could have done that, but they did it in this way. It took longer. And there was a point when, in 1938, the supramental manifestation was imminent. I've had interviews with a couple of people who were alive in that time and who were there actually from the beginning of the ashram's formation, and they, from many of them, said you could feel in the atmosphere as if something was about to happen, some imminent manifestation of something divine beyond your conception, and an intensity of an ananda which was infusing into the atmosphere, building up to an intensity, ready for a new birth of a new world, new consciousness. And that was when the Second World War began. The mother goes so far as to say the Second World War began as a way to prevent this, by forcing their attention of Sri Aurobindo and the mother to now deal with a situation which was threatening to subvert human evolution itself and to prevent this from happening. Well, that's one way one could look at it. It did have that effect eventually. Not only they had to turn their attention to this, but at the same time there was a huge influx of refugees that came to Pondicherry. And the mother said we couldn't turn them away, so we had to accept them. A dramatic dilution of the receptive vehicle for the supramental consciousness. And when that mixture happens, especially of a certain kind, which is contrary to the supramental, you can see what Mother spoke earlier about the intelligence, human intellect fearing the supermind, but also other impulses which actively reject or invite contrary forces. All of this effectively compelled a situation where this was no more possible. And the only way left was for Sri Aurobindo or the mother, one of them, to leave the body, go across on the other side and form a bridge linking. Sri Aurobindo's observation to the mother was her body was more plastic and more suited for the physical transformation, so she had to stay and he chose to leave the body, and from the other side forming a link with her, linking, so to say, the highest into the material, forming this bridge. In 1956, 29th of February, this event took place, and the supramental consciousness was manifest in Earth evolution as an active force. The mother describes that event in these words, and I read. It is a note dated 29th February 1956. During the common meditation on Wednesday. This evening, the Divine Presence, concrete and material, was there, present amongst you. I had a form of living gold, bigger than the universe, and I was facing a huge and massive golden door which separated the world from the divine. As I looked at the door, I knew and willed in a single movement of consciousness that the time has come. And lifting with both hands a mighty golden hammer, I struck one blow. One single blow on the door, and the door was shattered to pieces. Then the supramental light and force and consciousness rushed down upon earth in an uninterrupted flow. This was written in 1956, but was first published on the first anniversary of the supramental manifestation of 29th February 1960. There are many elements in the text which are deeply significant and can be understood in a way that for which we have to really relate to the sense of the supramental consciousness and how it is experienced. She says, I had a form of living gold bigger than the universe. What does that even mean? For our consciousness, it's difficult to conceive. But being in the supramental consciousness is what she is describing, her as the supramental being, bigger than the universe, therefore. Infinity in consciousness, beyond the universe. Living gold. And a massive golden door which separated the world from the divine is the separator, which in the Vedic tradition is referred to as the golden lid, which covers the face of the truth, but at the same time separates, also reduces the intensity of the truth light so that it becomes bearable for the world, and so on. So that would be a natural sense of what this door represents. But more than that, it is the barrier, the separation between our consciousness and that. I knew and willed in a single movement of consciousness, and this is the work of the Divine Mother. She stands for humanity, at the same time she acts to manifest the divine will while still being connected to humanity. So there's this single movement of knowing, willing, and a single action. I struck one blow, and the mother added later to the text, one single blow, highlighting the sense of the nature of this action. It's a singular, one-pointed focus, and the door was shattered to pieces. And then what happens? Obviously, everything that's on the other side comes pouring down. The supramental light and force and consciousness rushed down upon earth in an uninterrupted flow. This is also very important, uninterrupted, not just a burst and then a stop. But what is interesting is light, force, consciousness, not power. And later she comments about it. And we understand now why, perhaps, because had that come, it might have been premature, too much, too intense. But the light, force and consciousness are right now here, working in us, around us, through some kind of indirection, because we cannot receive directly the action of something infinite. But still it is there. And as a result, many things are inevitable. There are several messages of the mother around this, which perhaps we will see later. But I come back to the narrative of what happened. So, from this point on, this uninterrupted flow is active in the Earth atmosphere as an influence. One of the things the mother said was, as a result of the supramental consciousness, there will no more be a third world war. And when you look at the world situation, even now, but going through back all these 60 plus years, so many times, or perhaps even all the time in some way, it seemed as if the trend towards a world war was inevitable, or it was imminent. It's about to happen as if, and yet somehow things suddenly reduce, tensions change, alliances form, affinities develop, something breaks the tension or distracts, modifies, and it is prevented, postponed, delayed, or sometimes resolved. And that's the working of the supermind through circumstances. In itself, it does not change human stupidity, because human stupidity, well, it refuses the action of the supermind. But it can use the stupidity, modify it, redirect it in ways, use somebody else's stupidity to counter, to align, and somehow bring a greater harmony. But not directly, secretly, through these stupidities, through these appearances, through these self-interests of humanity. So, the fact that it is active ensures there will be no third world war. That was one of the observations the mother made. I've also spoken many times of the change in the weather patterns and in the human body, so that I don't repeat. Those, she said, would be the obvious physical result of the working of the supermind. The weather would become more temperate gradually, and the human body would become more androgynous, the distinction between the male and female becoming less, especially in those who train their bodies. And I've always pointed to the Olympic gymnasts as an example of this. But if this has happened, the full emergence of the working of supermind in human affairs is inevitable, and it's a question of time. Meanwhile, what is it doing? And when this question was asked to the mother, she says, the supermind, I don't have the text unfortunately, but broadly the line was, the approach of the line of the meaning was, the supermind is working to hasten human evolution as rapidly as possible without disrupting or destroying. Because if you exceed what the human consciousness is capable of at this moment, well, you can cause cracks, you can break and damage, which has other consequences. So, as quickly as possible by multifaceted action, through human will, ill will, desire, greed, whatever form it may be, by aligning, realigning, modifying, tilting, shaping, introducing new, activating, subduing, modifying in some ways. But where the human consciousness is more aware, more receptive, a more direct action can take place. And that can hasten enormously. So all depends on the receptivity. If not receptive, it will still do. If more receptive, it will do faster, smoother, with less struggle, with less damage or destruction. So our openness to its action, or to the divine will, or to the divine consciousness and presence, makes its action more possible, more directly, smoothly, rapidly. So this is broadly as a background of what happened on 29th of February 1956. The mother herself gave it great importance in the anniversary. So, which brings us to the question of what is the importance of an anniversary of such an event, and in this case the 17th anniversary. I said earlier that it was one of those strange, perhaps humorous aspects of the divine consciousness, that it shows the only date which occurs once in 4 years. But I also found in that a symbolism. We can take it as my personal view, my personal sense of what that symbolism means, but still to me it is very vivid and true. So I will read from a passage of the little booklet, The Mother, where Sri Aurobindo has spoken of the four powers of the Mother, Maheshwari, Mahakali, Mahalakshmi, Mahasaraswati. And of them he says, in their working in us. But human nature, bounded, egoistic and obscure, is inapt to receive these great presences or to support their mighty action. Inapt. Not habituated to. Not inept. It's a different meaning. Inapt. It's not ready for. And what are the three things which prevent that? Bounded, because that is the consciousness of infinity, or those are powers infinite. Egoistic, narrow, cut off, separated, when those are one with the divine. Obscure, not sufficiently aware, not sufficiently conscious, when those are in full awareness of the divine. So if you grow in these three, closer to the divine, obviously that action can be more direct. But what happens next? Only when the four have founded their harmony and freedom of movement in the transformed mind, life and body, can those other rarer powers manifest in the earth movement and the supramental action become possible. So when those powers have been manifest in earth movement, then supramental action becomes possible directly. For when her personalities are all gathered in her and manifested, and their separate working has been turned into a harmonious unity, and they rise in her to their supramental Godheads, then is the Mother revealed as the supramental Mahashakti, and brings pouring down her luminous transcendences from their ineffable ether. Then can human nature change into dynamic divine nature, because all the elemental lines of the supramental truth consciousness and truth force are strung together, and the harp of life is fitted for the rhythms of the eternal. But you see, the four personalities, or all personalities gathered in her, manifested, and their separate workings turned into a harmonious unity, and then each rising to its highest supramental poise, that the Mother is seen as the supramental Mahashakti revealed. Here you get the glimpse, which to me is the deeper symbolism of this date and the recurrence in 4 years. It's as if each of the 4 years represents one of these four powers. Each year prepares one of them, integrating, and when all the four have been sufficiently unified and welded, we have a partial manifestation. Again, building, unifying these four, and a more complete manifestation, and building, unifying. So every 4 years, so to say, when this work of intensifying and unifying is sufficiently done, that a new grade of manifestation can emerge. That seems to me the natural sense of the rhythm and the harmony of this. Being a leap year, every 4 years the anniversary happens. Interestingly, just from a numerical perspective, in 1 century and 100 years, you will not have 25, you will have 24 anniversaries of the supramental manifestation, because as the calendar is created to compensate for slight for the exact precision, let's say, of the Earth's orbit, which is not 1 day, but has a slight change has a different value. So every 4 years you make a correction which brings it back to something reasonable, but every 100 years you have to make one more correction in the other way. You skip a leap year. So every 100 years, the 100th year or the 0th year of the next 100 is not a leap year. With that, you get a number which is again close enough to the actual position of the Earth, but it's not yet quite it. One more correction is required. Every 400 years, you do not skip the leap year on the 100th year, but you accept it. So the year 2000 was one such. It was the 400th year, and therefore we had a leap year, and the supramental manifestation was observed on 29th. But in the next year 2100, there will be no leap year and we will skip that. So effectively in 100 years we have 24 anniversaries. Just for those of you who like to play with numbers, we need not give to it too much importance though. The point though is, there is a symbolism, there is a sense of what is an anniversary. And we look back at the mother's observation that on your birthday, an anniversary of your birth, it's as if the earth has come back to its relative position in relation to the sun. Symbolically, it's as if the sun being the divine, your soul is most open, most receptive to the divine light, as if you were at that point entering the earth atmosphere to be born. It's as if the passage linking the two, which was so much vivid at the time of birth or just before birth, which is then lost in the incarnation and the materiality, is as if partly reopened because of the nature of this realignment. If you think of it in such terms, any anniversary represents this. The similar circumstances repeated allow for as if a greater affinity, a greater alignment with that original event, as if a kind of a resonance in nature's rhythms with an original event. So every time there is that resonance, one feels as if the power of that event more strongly. You strike a bell, another bell with the exact same frequency will start vibrating. That's the power of resonance. When it is aligned, it will vibrate and pick up. It's no more the same bell, but it will pick up. Similarly, when a date is aligned by vibration of a similar alignment, it tends to as if make more accessible, pick up, tends to. A resonance, an echo, a rhythmic repetition of the same pattern, the same event as if in symbolic sense repeats. It's a real symbolism. Symbolism is not just an idea, it's a real thing. So something can be caught of an echo as if, of a resonance of, and if you are conscious enough, you can catch and receive with greater intensity, with greater ease on that occasion. In principle, from purely consciousness perspective, you have only to become very quiet and tune in, and you can get the same receptivity to anything you choose. Any day, any time, anywhere. The difference is, that's a personal effort. Whereas this is a collective rhythm. Nature herself, as it is in the positioning of the earth, let's say, in its orbit around the sun, or the fact that a large part of humanity gives to this date that value, makes for a collective vehicle, collective receptivity in the resonance. If you think of the New Year, for example, there's so many different traditions which observe New Year on a different date. The fact that the large mass of humanity today, largely because of transition through colonizations, that a large part of humanity observes January 1st as a new year, makes for a collective turn of consciousness on that event for a particular purpose. And so with it comes a resonance of certain dates, and 29th February becomes one such. So it is as if nature's rhythm or a collective rhythm of the collective human consciousness, whatever the exact mechanism, we can take advantage of this resonance or this rhythm. And that's why the anniversary becomes important for us. How do we take advantage of it? What can we do? Remember what we spoke earlier about. You could choose to be completely ignorant, unconscious, insensitive, sleeping. You might still receive a glimmer of its light. You can be blind, the sun rays might strike you. You may not see the light, but somewhere in some form the warmth of that light will be registered. however unconsciously. So that also does happen. I remember one year, it was long back, I was still very small, but my teacher MP Pandit had gone abroad, and those days once you went abroad you couldn't come back easily, so he was out for several months. And there was a particular date which we thought important, and on the calendar it had been noted, and my mother had written, scribbled some initials. She had written K.SH. And then we'd forgotten about it. My teacher was not there to remind us. We were there waiting. And then looking at that big calendar, I said, oh, but that is something special we have noted. What is it? And we couldn't remember what it was. But that evening, there was a tremendous special downpour and a special meditation. And much later, we remembered, K.SH. Kapali Shastri, it was his birthday. We had forgotten, but on that event something did align. He remembered, or whatever was the alignment of the anniversary, the power presence was felt. I shared a very different experience, which was my personal experience. I had some special circumstance. A group of us from the ashram were invited to go to the Indian Navy for some kind of a lecture training program to Visakhapatnam. And it so happened that it was on the day of my birthday. And because that's almost sacrosanct for us in the ashram, I was very uncomfortable, but finally I said, no, the work is more important, so I will skip it and go on my birthday. But then I decided to observe my birthday 4 days before leaving. And I picked the date 4 days before and did everything as I would on the birthday. I went through, at that time you could go to Sri Aurobindo's room, etc. I went through all that, and it was as you would on a birthday, receive whatever you receive, and it was all full of the afflatus and the presents and all that. And it passed, as it happens, after the birthday. I went to that program, and the day which was technically my birthday, I felt nothing. Or nothing special, nothing unusual. It's as if the birthday had already been done. And this was just one more day. And this is an observation the mother makes so many times. And in one particular, when she's asked about, when she comes for the Kali Puja, she's asked, why do you come on this day? She says, because it amuses you. So people are a bit surprised. They say, what, you do it to amuse us? She says, well, I was disrespectful. But she said I do it because you value that day. And then she makes this observation, sometimes Mahakali, she comes on a different day, sometimes a few days before, sometimes a few days after, sometimes on a completely different day. But since you people want to follow that date, yes, I come on that day, and sometimes I invoke her also. She leaves it at that. But you have to understand that if you really look at it from a spiritual point of view, the date in itself is not important. But you can catch the trend line of this rhythm in nature and, so to say, amplify a line, or you can completely ignore and choose to be free of nature's rhythms and freely align anytime, any day. And as if by doing that, you shift nature's rhythm even. And timing of nature's rhythm can so be shifted. It doesn't matter. Finally, that rhythm was formed by an experience. The experience can be activated anytime. It would modify the rhythm. So this is the deeper sense of such things. One need not be too obsessed with the fixity of a date. But here's the advantage here. There's a collective intensity, a collective alignment, a collective opening that we can take advantage of, even if you don't particularly feel aligned at that point or capable. So how do we take advantage of this opportunity? As I said, we can be unconscious and ignore. Still, you'll get some effect. You might have forgotten what it's about, but still you'll say, yes, something happened. There was something different that day. Okay, good enough. But if you're conscious, what can you do? First, the requirement would be become conscious as you can of what it is, what it represents, or at the very least, conscious of the divine presence. Second, being conscious, you open to it. You can be conscious without an opening. I'm conscious of the sunlight, but my gates are closed. I open my gates and my windows, and now the sunlight can come in. Third, giving yourself. It's not enough that you open, the light comes in. What do you do? It's absorbed in the darkness of the room. Or it reflects on the mirror, bounces around, goes out. Or it heats up something a little bit, but eventually is dissipated. If instead you give yourself actively, consciously to the influence that fills you, to the presence that fills you, in the act of self-giving, you make yourself receptive to its action on you. You become malleable and soft instead of rigid and resistant. And then it can shape you. Third step. The fourth step would be, you give yourself, but then what do you do after that? All that happens, you include in the whole of you and contain what is received so that it may continue. As in a jar, you become the pot of the Vedic rishis. Then they exclaim that the human being is a pot in which the soma is poured. Well, contain in the pot. Not spilling. And finally, assimilating. So long after the event itself has passed of the downpour, you still contain, you still carry, and you integrate in your consciousness, in the parts of your consciousness, in your life, in your activities, until something of it then can stay in permanence. Or the shape and form of your consciousness and of your life are changed by its action. And that change stays. Your consciousness is changed. You are not the same person. So first, becoming conscious. Second, consciously opening. Third, giving yourself in the state of opening to be shaped, to be molded by the action of the divine consciousness, by the supramental force, as in the phrase Sri Aurobindo uses in the Life Divine, to become plastic to the touch of the infinite. Fourth, receiving it all. So you opened, you gave yourself, but then allow the full reception. Soak in, hold, containing, not spilling. And fifth, assimilating, integrating into your life. This can be done individually. This can also be done collectively. As a collective, we could do all this together. And that's where certain collective activities can have a great value. For example, a collective meditation in which we sit together and do this. To receive not just in each one of us, but even as a collective, that in our collective lives, in our interpersonal relations, actions, in the quality of consciousness with which we relate to each other, can this be integrated? But we must want it collectively. When that can be done, it is certainly very effective, very helpful. And because the supramental consciousness is the consciousness of infinity, a collective reception, a collective vessel can be far more effective than an individual for the purpose of transforming life, to transform the collective engagement with each other. Then a collective vessel is much more effective. Of course, for your own consciousness and its transformation, you are good enough. We can also consider, just as there can be a special activity together, we can also consider a special space in which this can be done. For those of us who are aligned to the ideal of the integral yoga and to this event and this action that Sri Aurobindo and the Mother have gifted to humanity, it can be a great aid if this is done in a space that is dedicated to this work. a collective space such as the Sri Aurobindo Ashram or Auroville or one of the many little centers that we have in different parts of the world. In that collective space, to be able to receive and to fix can make a great difference. At that point, we have three things working together. Our individual effort, driven ideally by the aspiration of the soul. The rhythm of nature, with the date, with the alignment, with the space, with the collective, and in the collective aspiration as a rhythm. And the third is the active power of the supramental consciousness that works in all this to lift, to infuse us and to lift us. When these three work together, then of course so much can happen. Recall the line which we read earlier. Then is the mother revealed as the supramental Mahashakti and brings pouring down her luminous transcendences from their ineffable ether. Well, something of this, even a little bit, when we relate to the Divine Mother as the one who bridges the highest divine consciousness with us, and now also embodies the supramental consciousness. Something of this unification of these three things can be possible with great ease and with deep intimacy, and felt deeply in closeness to our soul's aspiration. If we are conscious of this, we can make use of that day to great effect. I would like to read from a couple of messages that the Mother distributed on that occasion at various times subsequently. Most of these have to do with the sense of the new world being born. She had long ago written a prayer with the hope of this realization. So she took that prayer and changed the words from the future tense to the present tense. So there's a very interesting text where she has actually cut off the old words and replaced by the new words, changing the tense. And now the prayer becomes like this. Lord, Thou hast willed, and I execute. A new light breaks upon the earth. A new world is born. The things that were promised are fulfilled. Where earlier it was the things that are promised will be fulfilled, or a new world will be born. She's changed it to the present. It is done. And in 1956, in April, she wrote, the manifestation of the supramental upon earth is no more a promise, but a living fact, a reality. It is at work here, and one day will come when the most blind, the most unconscious, even the most unwilling, shall be obliged to recognize it. And then again in April, to all those who aspire, open yourself to the new force. Let it do in you its work of transformation. Very simply stated, all that we discussed earlier as the process by which you can open and receive, but it's just this. And again in May, open yourself to the new light that has dawned upon earth, and a luminous path will spread in front of you. To another person, there's this very interesting statement. Beyond all question, somebody asked something, beyond all question, it is the supramental light. And then she says, do not tense yourself, be open, passively allow it to penetrate your body. It has the power to restore you to strength and health. (1957) Heralding the birth of a new world, we invite all those who want to have a place in it to prepare themselves sincerely for it. And finally, from what I am reading, February 1958, 21st February, to celebrate the birth of a transitory body can satisfy some faithful feelings, because it's her birthday, and so to celebrate the manifestation of the eternal consciousness can be done at every moment of the universal history. But to celebrate the advent of a new world, the supramental world, is a marvelous and exceptional privilege. And suddenly it places this event into a very different category, isn't it? Some time back, nearly 10 years ago, I had taken up a certain text which consists of the last few articles that Sri Aurobindo wrote the year before he left his body. These appeared in the bulletin and later were compiled and placed in the form of a booklet titled The Supramental Manifestation of Earth. The articles are all focused entirely on the transformation of the physical body in particular, and deal with the question of the physical transformation, as well as, in the last few articles, the infusion of the supramental consciousness in the physical mind and the formation of the mind of light. In certain ways, one could look at these articles as representing the completion of things which he has only begun to describe in the synthesis of yoga. And so, as part of our study of the synthesis of yoga, we had taken up these articles, and elaborated on some of them and their implications. So those have not yet been put on the YouTube. They were all put up initially at that time on a different channel, on a different platform, which shut down eventually. But what I would like to propose is, beginning of this week, in a few days, we will start uploading those talks in sequence, and it can be a good point of entry into a certain aspect of the yoga, as well as Sri Aurobindo's articulation of his vision of the supramental being and the steps we need to take in that direction. And especially the most practical, the most applicable to us today is the part relating to the formation of the mind of light. So sometime in the coming week, perhaps on Tuesday or Wednesday, we will start uploading the first of these and upload one each week. So we are today, 24th of February, we are discussing this in between the mother's birthday, which is on the 21st, 28th, which is Auroville's birthday, and 29th, which is the anniversary of the supramental manifestation. And for those of us who are participating in this now, before the 29th, we can use this as an occasion of preparation over the next few days for what that event represents. In a sense, all of us, without exception, are here for the supramental transformation, here on earth, incarnate in a physical body. Otherwise, we could have stayed in any of those higher worlds and perhaps even wandered or grown to some possibility of entry into the supramental worlds. No problem. We took birth in a material body, incarnating in the physical body, because our intention, or the soul's aspiration, in its long journey across lives, is to realize the highest divine consciousness here in matter, in the physical world, in a physical body, which realization is not complete until the body itself becomes a participant to the divine consciousness, which participation is not complete until the body itself becomes substantially transformed by that divine consciousness and becomes now a representative, a worthy representative of the divine knowledge, power, love, beauty, undiluted, unreduced, undistorted, immaterial substance. This can only be done by the supramental consciousness transforming the physical, because that's the creative power which forms the worlds, which also forms effectively the ignorance from which the body is formed, but also therefore can overcome the resistance and opposition of the inconscience and ignorance and all the inertia of matter in order to divinize it. So if our purpose in taking birth was merely to stop short with a divine reflection of consciousness in life, it would be insufficient. We come in because we want to go all the way, and to go all the way requires this transformation of the physical body itself, and the power that transforms is the supramental power. Therefore, all of us without exception have as our goal, whether we remember or not, in the long term, irrespective of intermediate steps, this one ideal of the divinization of the physical life itself by the supramental consciousness, by the supramental power, and the divine incarnation on earth, fully revealed in its divinity, perfectly divinized. And so this is our purpose. And even though we may for many lives, many hundreds of lives, focus on intermediate goals, this will always be the one all-compelling, all-encompassing goal, isn't it? So it's useful to become conscious of this, especially now, because this is the time in our human evolution that power has actually been brought down on earth as an active force in the collective human consciousness, something not done before, not done again. We are in the presence of a new actual birth of a new consciousness and a new world. Never before had in a past life, never again in a new life. Being here at this moment is therefore the most precious, and this life is the most valuable. Do what you can to maximize the opportunity given to you. Make the most of it. At the very least, realign yourself to this ideal, to this deeper sense of purpose, and take one small step in your aspiration, if nothing else. Just by becoming conscious in aspiration. And then a little bit of opening, a little bit of giving ourselves, a little bit of the receiving and containing and assimilating to whatever extent. But a little bit is good enough. Because that little bit which opens to something so much greater, it having a little foothold within you can do so much more, infinitely more, being a power of infinity, isn't it? So let that be for us our aspiration, and for those of us who feel it so drawn, let it be our conscious intention for the next few days, in preparation for the 29th and thereafter for the rest of our lives. Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you.